The night Riker put his crest on another woman, the kingdom didn't fall apart. His Luna did something far worse. She went quiet. And quiet, in a world built on dominance and teeth, is the most dangerous sound there is. She didn't scream, she didn't beg. She just took off her crown, set it down like it was nothing, and walked. Thousands of wolves watched and felt something cold move through the air that had nothing to do with the winter wind. They called it dignity. But dignified people don't bring down kingdoms. Stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're watching this one unfold. The festival had been burning for 3 days straight. Moonfire came once every 7 years, and the wolves of the Ashvale Kingdom treated it like a second heartbeat finally allowed to pound loud again. They strung lanterns made of amber glass from every tower and post. They slaughtered elk in the lower fields and let the smoke rise thick and sweet into the dark. Drums rolled from sundown to sundown, and the howling that broke out at midnight on the second night rattled the bones in the old walls and made the children press their faces to their mothers' chests and laugh because they didn't know yet what it meant when wolves howled like that. It meant the hunger was awake. The great courtyard of Ashvale Palace had been dressed for ceremony the way a wound gets dressed for display. The wrapping made it look clean. White stone scrubbed pale, torches and iron brackets burning orange against the black sky. Rows of wolves packed shoulder to shoulder in their finest furs and court dress, breath visible in the cold air, voices low and tight with the specific tension that gathers before something important breaks. Luna Evelina Ashford stood to the right of the raised stone platform where the Alpha King would address his people. She had stood in this spot 9 times before. Festivals, oath ceremonies, border treaties, the funeral of Riker's father. She knew exactly how the torchlight moved at this hour, how it came from the left and made the silver embroidery on her gown catch fire, how it turned the Luna crown on her head into something that looked less like metal and more like it had grown there. She knew because she had paid attention to every single detail of this role for 4 years. She was 26 years old, and she had been paying that quality of attention to something that was already over before she had fully understood it had begun. Her face was still. This was not a performance. She had a face that went still the way stone goes still. Not because there was nothing underneath, but because whatever was underneath had learned long ago that the surface needed to hold. Her wolf was different. Her wolf had been pacing a tight circle inside her chest since the afternoon, and it hadn't stopped. It knew. Wolves always knew before the mind decided to catch up. Evelina watched Riker cross the platform and felt the wolf inside her go absolutely still at last. Not calm, still. The way prey goes still. The way something that has just understood the full shape of its situation goes still. Riker Ashvale was built like the throne room he ruled, tall, severe, designed to take up space in a way that made everything around him feel like it was arranged for his benefit. His dark hair was pulled back at the nape of his neck for the ceremony, and his crown, heavier than hers, sat level on his head the way only a man who had worn a crown since birth could manage. He moved with the particular ease of someone who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere. He was also, Evelina knew, in precise and unforgiving detail, the reason she had not slept a full night in 4 months. She had not told anyone that. She was the Luna. The Luna did not announce her erosion. The drums shifted rhythm as Riker reached the center of the platform, and the crowd pulled itself tight, that specific human wolf compression that happens when something official is about to happen, when the shape of the world is about to be described aloud and made real by the describing of it. Evelina kept her hands loose at her sides. Her gown was deep blue, the color the court called midnight wolf. Her hair had been dressed by 3 attendants for 2 hours. She had eaten nothing since midday, and her stomach knew it, but her face did not. Riker raised one hand and the drums stopped. The silence came down like a hammer. People of Ashvale. His voice carried the way alpha voices always carried. Not through volume alone, but through something pressed beneath the volume, something that touched the wolf in every person present and said, "This matters. Attend." "I have led this kingdom for 11 years, Riker said. "I have made decisions in that time that shaped every pack, every territory, every family standing in this courtyard tonight. Some of those decisions were made from strategy, some from strength." He paused. "Tonight I make one from truth." Something moved through the crowd. Not sound. Closer to pressure. Evelina felt the wolf in her chest sit down very slowly. She had known. She had known for 4 months with the specific bone-deep knowledge of someone who has been watching the foundation crack and telling herself it was just the way old stone settles. She had known, and she had stayed, because leaving on a feeling was not the same as leaving on proof, and she was not the kind of woman who destroyed her life on a feeling. So she stayed, and now she was going to watch the proof walk out in front of 1,000 wolves and announce itself. Celine appeared at the far end of the platform. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, function dressed in form, the prettiness almost incidental to the precision. Blonde, where Evelina was dark, small, where Evelina was willowy, wearing red in the middle of all this ceremony, white and blue, and wearing it like a challenge. She moved across the platform toward Riker without looking at the crowd, without looking at Evelina, with the particular forward momentum of someone who has already decided the room is hers. Evelina breathed in once, slowly, through her nose. Celine stopped beside Riker. He turned to her. The crowd saw his face change, and even the people who hadn't known before, who had told themselves the rumors were just rumors, who had believed because they wanted to believe that their alpha king was not this man. Even they understood in that moment what was happening. Riker reached into his coat and withdrew a crest. It was cast in heavy silver, his personal crest, not the royal seal, not the pack insignia, the crest of his bloodline. The one a male wolf placed on the person he was claiming as his own before the pack and the sky and everything that watched from the dark between stars. He pressed it to Celine's collarbone. His hands were steady. Evelina heard the exact moment the crowd stopped breathing. Then she heard Riker say, without turning toward her, without the basic decency of even turning his face in her direction, "The kingdom will recognize Celine as the Alpha King's chosen companion. Changes to court standing will be formalized within the fortnight." Changes to court standing. 4 years. The funeral of his father. The treaty with the Iron Ridge Pack, where she had stood for 6 straight hours in freezing rain and spoken each clause herself because Riker's voice had given out from 3 days of negotiations. The winter, the sickness moved through the eastern packs, and she had ridden out without guard because the healers needed to reach the children and the roads weren't safe for caravans and someone with the Luna's authority needed to clear them. The morning she had miscarried and told no one because there was a border dispute that week and Riker needed to focus, and she had gone to the council meeting 2 days later and no one had known. Changes to court standing. The wolf inside her opened its mouth. Evelina reached up and removed her crown. It was not a dramatic gesture. That was what the crowd would remember later, when they told this story to their children and their children's children. When it became the kind of story that gets repeated, not because it ends happily, but because it lands with the specific weight of a true thing. There was nothing theatrical about it. Her hands came up, her fingers found the inside edges of the crown, the way hands find familiar objects in the dark, and she lifted it away from her head and brought it down to her side. She walked to the platform. The wolves nearest her pulled back, a small human flinch, the instinctive retreat from something that doesn't behave the way expected things should behave. She climbed the 2 stone steps without looking at Riker. She crossed to where he stood with Celine, and she bent and placed the crown at his feet. Celine met her eyes for exactly 1 second. Evelina gave her nothing. Not hatred, not contempt, not the specific hot anger that would have felt satisfying to show and been used as evidence against her. She gave Celine a face like the inside of a room with all the furniture removed, empty and absolutely final. Then she turned and walked back down the steps. The crowd parted for her. They could not have said why. She was walking at a normal pace. She was not radiating threat or power or the wild energy of a wolf about to shift. She was walking the way water moves when something has been decided about its direction, quietly, with the specific certainty of things that have already chosen their path. Behind her, she heard nothing from Riker. He said nothing. The crowd said nothing. The drums did not start again. She walked through the gates of the inner courtyard and then through the secondary arch into the palace approach road, and the silence followed her all the way out of earshot. And then she was alone in the dark beyond the festival lights, and the cold came at her from the north the way it always did at this elevation in late autumn, and her wolf opened its mouth again, and this time Evelina let it. Not a howl, not the grief sound, the loss sound, the sound wolves make when the thing that tethered them to a place has been cut. Just a breath, low and rough and too old for any soundbox to have made it, and then quiet. She had somewhere to be. Mira was waiting in the East Wing corridor the way she had been waiting in corridors for 12 years. One shoulder against the wall, arms crossed, the specific expression of a woman who has already calculated 17 versions of the current situation and is waiting to find out which one she has to manage. She was Evelina's head attendant, her secretary, her first and closest warning system, and the only person in the palace who Evelina had ever shown the underside of her control to. She was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with gray threaded through her dark hair and a voice like river ice, clear and cold and capable of tremendous sudden pressure. She took one look at Evelina walking toward her and said nothing. Evelina said, "Get Calla and Wren. I need the north room cleared by midnight." "Already started," Mira said. Evelina stopped walking and looked at her. "You knew," Evelina said. "I suspected since the 3rd week of the Wolftide month," Mira said. "I didn't tell you because you didn't want to be wrong, and you didn't want to be right," Evelina said. Mira's mouth tightened. "Yes." Evelina looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was stone and torchlit and cold, and somewhere far behind them the festival had finally begun making noise again, distant drum roll and voices finding their footing after the specific shock of witnessing something that unmade an assumption they hadn't known they were holding. "What did you prepare?" Evelina asked. "2 horses. The chest from the floor panel in your room, the letters you had sealed last autumn." Mira paused. "And the one from your father." Evelina had not opened that letter. She had not opened it for 3 years since the day it arrived, with her father's seal and her name in his handwriting on the outside, because she had not trusted herself to read it, and then set it down and go back to being the Luna. She had known, from the weight of it, the particular weight of envelopes that carry a verdict, that it contained something that would change the shape of her choices. She had chosen to hold the shape she had. "Pack it," she said. "It's packed." They looked at each other. Evelina felt something move through her chest that was not the wolf, was not grief exactly, was something older and quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of a door. You could contest it, Mira said. Not urging. Presenting the way she always presented options, stripped of her own preference, because she understood that her preference in this moment was not the thing that mattered. His father's law requires a formal dissolution before the court. He skipped the process. Every alpha elder within 3 territories knows the law was broken tonight. "I know," Evelina said. "You have grounds that would take him apart in front of the High Council. 4 years of documentation. I have kept every record. Correspondence, treaty contributions, the Eastern Pac relief during the sickness season. Your name is on 8 different formal agreements that are still active and binding. You contest the dismissal, and you could tie up his court processes for a year. Minimum." "I know," Evelina said again. "But you're not going to." "No." Mira breathed in through her nose. "Why?" Evelina thought about this carefully, the way she thought about most things. Not because she didn't know the answer immediately, but because she wanted the answer to be clean when she said it, wanted no residue of old feeling in the language. "Because fighting him for what he already decided he doesn't want," she said, "would require me to spend years of my life arguing for my own worth to a room full of people who watched him put a crest on another woman in front of 1,000 witnesses and didn't say a word." She looked at Mira. "That's not a war I want to win." Mira was quiet. "Also," Evelina said, "because I know something he doesn't." And she walked past Mira toward the north room and did not elaborate. They left before dawn, 3 of them. Evelina, Mira, and Wren, who was 19 and the best tracker Evelina had ever put on a horse, and who had been assigned to the Luna's personal staff 8 months ago and had spent the first month being too terrified to speak in full sentences. She had gotten over that. Evelina had a way of making people get over the terrified part faster than most. Not through reassurance, but through the simple, consistent fact of treating them as competent until they had no choice but to become so. The palace gates were unmanned at that hour. The guards who were usually posted had drifted toward the festival. No one had thought about the possibility of someone leaving. No one had expected her to leave. Evelina did not look back at the palace. She had made a rule about this kind of thing a long time ago, in a different context, when she was 11 years old and her mother had died, and she had stood at the graveside and understood that looking back at a thing that was finished would not make it unfinished. It would only make you stand still. She rode north. The road out of the capital ran straight for the first 2 miles, through the lower Pac settlement where the working wolves lived, and where, even at this hour, a few windows showed light and one old woman standing in a doorway watched them pass without expression. Then the road bent west and began to climb, and by the time they hit the first real tree cover, the palace lights were invisible below, and the sky had begun its slow gray argument with the dark. Wren rode beside her in silence for an hour. Then she said, "Where are we going?" "North," Evelina said. "How far north?" "Far enough." Wren processed this. She was not the kind of young person who needed constant filling in. One of the things Evelina valued about her was that she understood the difference between information she needed to do her job and information she was merely curious about. She was quiet for another stretch. Then she said, "I heard what he did." Evelina didn't answer. "I'm sorry," Wren said. "Don't be," Evelina said. "You didn't do it." Still, they rode. The cold was getting into Evelina's hands through her riding gloves. She let it. There was a specific usefulness to cold at the beginning of something difficult. It kept the body engaged, kept the mind from the particular inward spiral that sets in when there's too much warmth and quiet, and space for old feeling to find its legs. She thought about the letter from her father. She thought about the weight of it, the way she had held it 3 years ago and made a choice about it, and then she thought about what she now knew was inside it. Not certainly, but with the kind of close approximation that comes from knowing a person's mind well enough to calculate what they would say about a given situation. Her father had known something about Riker's throne. She had suspected this since the second year of her marriage, when she had found a discrepancy in the oldest Pact Treaty records and followed the thread far enough to see that it disappeared into a wall, and the wall had the specific shape of deliberate sealing. Somebody had made sure that thread could not be followed past a certain point. She had been Luna by then. She had packed that knowledge away in the same place she packed all the things she could not act on without destroying the position that allowed her to act on other things. She had packed it away, and she had kept doing the work because the work was real, and the people it served were real, and she had not been ready. Now she had no position to protect. And the letter was in the chest on Mira's horse. The sun came up sideways through the trees, and the three of them rode without stopping for warmth or food. And by midday they had crossed the Harrow River at the shallow ford and were well into the northern territories, and the world behind them was just a direction without specific weight. On the fourth night, they made camp in the ruins of an old border way station, the kind of structure that had been built 2 generations ago for treaty runners and abandoned when the borders changed. The walls still stood to shoulder height on 3 sides. They built a small fire in the protected corner, and Wren boiled water and Mira produced dried meat from her saddle pack, and they ate in the quiet that had settled between them over the past days, the specific, comfortable quiet of people who have been moving together through difficulty long enough that words have become optional. Evelina opened her father's letter. She sat close to the fire because the light was necessary, not because she needed the warmth, and she unfolded the pages. There were 4 of them, close written in her father's hand, which had been precise and slightly tilted until the last year of his life, when the joint sickness took his fingers and made writing cost him. And she read. Mira watched her face. Wren watched the dark past the broken walls. Evelina read the 4 pages once. Then she sat still with them in her lap for a long time. "What does it say?" Mira asked finally. Evelina looked up from the letter. Her face was still, but her eyes had something moving in them that Mira had seen very few times in 12 years, and each time it had preceded something significant. "It says," Evelina said, "that Riker's grandfather didn't win the throne." Mira waited. "He bought it," Evelina said, "with territory that belonged to 5 other pacts. Territory that was taken from them through a forged treaty, written after the original was altered and ratified before any of the injured parties could present a counterclaim." She folded the letter along its original creases. "My father found the proof when he was on the Eastern Council. He sealed it and sent it to me because he believed I was in a position to decide what to do with it, and he was not." She looked at the fire. "He sealed it 3 days before he died." The fire cracked. Wren had turned from the dark to watch her. "If that proof is valid," Mira said slowly, "and if the original treaties can be located, then every territorial claim Riker's line has made for 3 generations is built on fraud," Evelina said. "Every alliance sealed by invoking that ancestry, every oath sworn on the Ashvale bloodline." She put the letter carefully into the inside pocket of her riding coat, against her chest, where it sat flat and quiet and heavier than 4 pages of paper had any right to be. "That's not the kind of thing that stays buried," Mira said. "Not when the people who were robbed are still alive. Not when their grandchildren have been watching Ashvale collect power on top of power for 60 years. "No," Evelina agreed. "If the wrong person finds that information before you decide what to do with it, the wrong person already has access to more of Riker's court than I was ever able to fully map," Evelina said. Celine is not what she presented herself as. I knew that from the first month. I couldn't prove it in time. She said this without heat, without the edge of a woman rehearsing her grievances. She said it the way you note a weather observation. Accurate, actionable, impersonal. She will burn the kingdom down, Evelina said. Not because she hates it, because she needs the fire to cover what she's building. Ren said very quietly, "What do we do?" Evelina looked at her. This girl with her 19 years and her good tracking instincts and her willingness to ride into the dark without a full map. And Evelina thought about what it cost a person to be this willing, to give this quality of trust to someone else's direction. "We find the exiled wolves," Evelina said. "The ones the crown pushed out when they became inconvenient. The ones who know the northern territories and the old laws and the parts of the pact system that were functioning before Riker's family rebuilt it to serve the bloodline." She paused. "And then we find the original treaties." "And then?" "And then we decide." She stood, folding the last of the dried meat back into her pack, and looked at the sky above the broken walls, which was clear and black and scattered with the particular hard-edged stars that only come out when the temperature has dropped well below the comfort line. The wolf in her chest had been quiet since they crossed the harrow. She had thought that was grief, the wolf going dormant the way animals go dormant in cold. But standing here now with her father's letter against her ribs and the shape of the thing in front of her finally visible, she understood it hadn't been grief at all. It had been patience. The wolf had been waiting. And somewhere behind her in the palace she had left without a single word, something was already beginning to crack. She could not hear it yet, but she had been paying attention to foundations long enough to know how the sequence worked. First the silence, then the creak, then the thing that no one had believed could fall. 3 days north of the Harrow River, the messenger caught up with them. He was young, exhausted, riding a horse that had been pushed past what it should have been pushed past. And he found their camp at first light because Ren had tracked his approach from 2 miles out and woken the others before he arrived. He wore no pack insignia. His riding clothes were civilian, deliberately plain, the outfit of someone who did not want to be identified as working for anyone in particular. He held out a sealed letter without speaking. The seal was one Evelina recognized. Not Riker's seal, not any court seal, a private seal belonging to a woman named Aldrich, who sat on the High Council as the representative of the North Middle Territories, and who had, in Evelina's experience, the specific quality of intelligence that masquerades as neutrality until it becomes useful to be something else. Evelina broke the seal and read. The letter was 9 words. "They know you have the letter. Come back or run." Evelina looked at the messenger. "Who else received a version of this message?" He shook his head. "I was told to deliver to you only." "Who told you?" "Someone who said you'd know the name if I said the council room, the north chair, the woman who wears gray every session." "Aldrich." Evelina folded the letter. She looked at Mira, who had read it over her shoulder, and whose face had gone the specific shape of a woman rapidly recalculating distances and options. "They know," Mira said. "Yes." "Then Celine knows." "She knew before we left," Evelina said. "She's been watching me since the Tide month. She would have had someone in the East Wing." She paused. "She just didn't expect my father to have gotten there first." She handed the letter to the messenger. "Tell Aldrich I received her message. Tell her I'm going north, not back. Tell her that if she needs to know more than that, she knows where the northern way lines run." The messenger looked uncertain. "Go," Evelina said. He went. She stood in the gray morning light with her wolf wide awake and fully present in her chest for the first time since the night of the festival, no longer patient, no longer waiting. Something had just started moving that was not going to stop. The messenger's horse was still blowing hard when Evelina turned back to camp and started breaking it down. No discussion. No vote. She moved to her bedroll, rolled it tight, strapped it to her saddle, and the efficiency of her movements was its own kind of language. Not urgency exactly, but the particular economy of someone who has already run the numbers and knows how much time they have. Ren was already on her feet. Mira was stamping the fire. "North or east?" Ren asked. "North first," Evelina said. "Then east at the Grey Wing Fork. There's a settlement 2 days out, Carn Hollow. Exiled pack, maybe 40 wolves. Their elder was expelled from the Eastern Council 6 years ago when he brought a land grievance against Riker's steward." "You know him?" "I corresponded with him, twice. Officially, on Luna Stationary, about border supply routes." She tightened her saddle cinch without looking up. Unofficially, I listened carefully to the things he didn't put in writing. Mira looked at her across the dead fire. You were already building this. I was already watching, Evelina said. There's a difference. There wasn't much of one, but she had needed to believe in it at the time. They rode. Whoop. The gossip reached the northern territories 3 days before they did. This was the nature of wolf country. News moved faster than horses because it moved through the howl chain, pack to pack, the compressed signal language that carried emotional freight better than words ever could. By the time Evelina's small party crossed into the outer range of Carn Hollow's territory, every wolf within 50 miles already knew the shape of what had happened at the Moonfire Festival. They didn't know Evelina was coming, but they knew what she was now and what she wasn't. The first scout they encountered was a young male, maybe 22, crouched in the branch shadow of a dead oak at the edge of a tree line, watching the road. He dropped to the ground when they pulled up, and he didn't reach for a weapon. He just looked at Evelina with an expression she had seen before on the faces of people who are trying to reconcile what they expected with what they're actually seeing. You're the Luna, he said. I was, Evelina said. He looked at her for another beat. Then he said, Elder Cobb's going to want to see you. I know, she said. Take me to him. Elder Cobb was 63, built low and dense the way old wolves get when decades of shifted mass redistribute into something the bones just accept as permanent. He had a white scar running from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, old enough to have gone smooth, and he sat at the head of a long table in a stone-floored hall that smelled like pine smoke and tallow and the specific animal warmth of a space that holds a lot of bodies in winter. He had 7 of his wolves in the room when Evelina walked in. He didn't stand. She didn't expect him to. She had stopped expecting deference the moment she laid the crown at Riker's feet, and the loss of that expectation was, she was discovering, one of the cleaner feelings she'd had in years. Evelina Ashford, Cobb said. His voice was gravel and patience in equal measure. Sit down. She sat. Mira and Wren remained standing near the door. The 7 wolves watched without speaking. The fire in the grate behind Cobb was working hard against the cold, and it made his shadow enormous on the wall. You left the capital without a guard, Cobb said. I didn't want a guard. You're carrying something worth killing you for. She looked at him. You heard fast. I hear everything fast. That's how I've stayed alive out here for 6 years. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table, and studied her face the way people study things they're trying to get the true weight of. Celine already sent a rider north, looking for you. Evelina's jaw tightened slightly. 1 degree. When? She asked. Rider passed through Harrow Crossing 2 days ago, moving fast, asking questions about a woman traveling with 2 attendants. Cobb's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. People up here don't answer questions from the capital the way people down there do. I need 3 things, Evelina said. Shelter for a week, access to your archive. I know you kept records from your time on the Eastern Council. An introduction to the other exiled elders in this territory. Cobb was quiet. The fire cracked. You're not asking for my wolves, he said. Not yet. But you're thinking about it. I'm thinking about a lot of things, she said. What I'm not doing is walking into your hall and making demands I haven't earned. She met his eyes flat and direct, no deference and no performance in it, just the clear level regard of someone who understands exactly what they're asking and what it costs the person being asked. I have information that affects every pack in these territories. What I do with it depends on what I find here. That's the honest version. Cobb breathed in slowly through his nose. What kind of information? He said. The kind your grandfather's pack was owed 60 years ago, she said. The 7 wolves around the walls went very still. Cobb's eyes didn't move from her face. He had the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been hit with important information before, who have learned to absorb it without showing the impact, and who are now running the full calculation behind a face that reveals nothing. Say that again, he said. She said it again, and then she told him what the letter contained. They gave her a room in the north building, stone-walled, small-windowed, with a rope bed and a wool blanket and a candle that lasted 4 hours if you kept the draft off it. She slept better than she had in 4 months. In the morning, Cobb's archivist opened the record room. It was 3 days of work. Dense, slow, painstaking, the kind of work that requires a specific willingness to sit in discomfort long past the point where your eyes want to stop. cross-referencing her father's letter against Cobb's East Council records and the older documents he had pulled from a sealed chest that hadn't been opened, he told her, since the year he was expelled. On the evening of the second day, Wren found the thread. She was 19 years old and she had been working at the far end of the table in near silence since mid-morning, and she looked up from a water-stained ledger and said, "The second treaty." Evelina crossed to her. Wren spread two documents side by side and pointed. Her finger was steady. The original boundary treaty, 90 years old, signed by 6-pack elders, laid out the territorial divisions in precise and binding language that accounted for every river bend and ridgeline. Beside it, the amended version, dated 17 years later, the one that had been ratified, the one that became law, the one that formed the legal foundation for the Ashvale Throne's first great territorial consolidation. 3 clauses were different, not obviously, not in a way that would catch the eye of someone reading quickly, or reading with the assumption that what was in front of them was what had always been there. But reading them against each other, line by line, the differences opened up like a wound that had been stitched shut and was now, in the cold light of a northern archive, showing the shape of the original cut. "The signatures," Wren said. Evelina looked. The ratification signatures on the amended document, 5 of them, the seal marks of the 5 original injured packs, were present, clean, formal. "They never signed this," Evelina said. "No," Wren said. "Look at the ink on the third one." She had to hold the candle close. The ink on the third ratification mark was different from the others. Marginally, but measurably. A slightly different weight, a slightly different brown in the oxidization, in a way that only mattered if you were looking for it, in a way that would never matter if no one ever put both documents in front of a reader at the same time. "Someone added it," Evelina said. "After the fact," Wren said. "After the original ratification. Someone had access to the document and the seals and enough skill to make it hold for 60 years. She paused. "Almost hold." Evelina straightened. Her wolf was doing something in her chest that wasn't pacing. It was sitting fully upright, focused, the high alert stillness of an animal that has just identified the exact shape of the thing it has been tracking through a long forest. She had known there was a fraud. The letter had told her there was a fraud. She had not understood until this moment that the fraud was not just historical, that it was documented, that it was sitting here in this archive in the cold of the north, provable. Mira appeared in the doorway. Her face was wrong. "What?" Evelina said. "Ryder just came in," Mira said. "From the capital." "Celine's?" "No." Mira paused. "Riker's." He was young, palace-trained, wearing the subdued writing colors that Riker used for private correspondence. He was also, notably, terrified in the way people are terrified when they have been given a job they understand the stakes of and have just arrived to find the situation considerably more complicated than described. He was waiting in the main hall. Cobb stood against the far wall with his arms crossed, watching. Evelina walked in without hurrying and looked at the rider. "Speak," she said. "Alpha King Riker requests." "Don't say requests," she said. "Tell me what he actually said." The rider's throat moved. "He said, he told me to tell you that there are complications in the capital and that your presence—" "There are complications," Evelina said. "Yes." "What kind?" "The Greymount Pack has withdrawn from the Alliance Council. The Caro and Duskfen Packs sent formal notices of suspended cooperation 3 days after the festival. The King's advisors believe it's—" He stopped. "They believe it's what?" she said. "They believe it's connected to what happened at the Moonfire Festival," he said, very carefully, like a man stepping across a frozen surface he is not certain will hold. "They believe the visible dissolution of the—" He stopped again. "They believe it looks bad." Evelina looked at him for a long, level moment. "It looks bad. 4 years. 8 treaties. The Eastern Sickness Roads, the miscarriage she had not named because there was no one to name it to. A kingdom that had functioned, had held its alliances, had kept its relationships intact across 3 contested territorial seasons, because she had been in those rooms doing the work that kept the stones from sliding. "It looks bad." Something moved through her that she did not show on her face. It was not anger exactly. Anger was too hot for what this was. This was colder. This was the feeling of a very clear understanding arriving fully formed. "Tell me," she said, "what he wants." "He wants you to come back," the writer said. temporarily, in an advisory capacity, to help stabilize the alliance relationships until what? The writer's eyes moved slightly. Not enough. Until the situation with Celine is clarified, he said. Evelina breathed in through her nose. Cobb made a sound from across the room. Very small. Barely a sound at all. But she heard it, and she knew what it meant. That she was watching a man use careful language to describe a fire he had started, and was now asking the person he'd pushed out of the burning building to come back and help him hold the hose. Go back to Riker, she said. The writer waited. Tell him I received his message, she said. Tell him I understand the complications. Tell him that when I'm ready to communicate, I'll communicate. She held the writer's eyes. Tell him not to send another writer. He won't. The writer stopped himself. He won't what? She said. He won't accept that answer. I know, she said. Tell him anyway. 10. She stood outside in the cold after the writer left, in the narrow yard behind the north building where the wind came down off the upper ridgeline and moved the dead grass in slow lateral waves. Mira came out and stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment. He's scared, Mira said. He should be, Evelina said. The alliances are leaving because the Pax can feel when a kingdom's center has gone hollow. They don't need to be told. They can smell it. She watched the grass move. He built 11 years of stability on top of my work and didn't know it because he was never in the rooms where the work happened. And Celine, Mira said. Celine knows exactly what she's doing. Evelina's voice was flat and certain, no heat in it. The temperature of someone who has already done the grief about a thing and is now only thinking. She's been working the court for 2 years minimum. The advisor withdrawals. The subtle errors in the treaty renewal communications last autumn that I kept having to correct. The way information I gave Riker privately kept arriving in conversations I wasn't in. She paused. She was building a picture of what the court looked like without me in it. Now she's living in that picture and she's finding out what it actually costs. She'll come for you, Mira said. Not a writer next time. No, Evelina agreed. What do we do? Evelina looked at the ridgeline. The sky above it was the flat white of a day that couldn't decide whether to snow. In the morning, she said, we go to see the other elders. I need to know who's still willing to talk and who's already been approached by Celine's people. She paused. And I need to know where the original treaty documents were physically stored after the ratification, not the copies, the originals. Why? Because if the originals still exist, Evelina said, and if the falsification is on the copies that became law, then the proof isn't just in an old letter in my coat. It's in the law archive. It's in the High Council's own records. She turned to look at Mira. And if that's true, then this isn't a grievance. It's a nullification. Mira was very still. Of the throne, she said. Of the bloodline claim, Evelina said, which is the same thing. The wind moved the grass, and the cold settled into the yard, and somewhere above them on the ridge a wolf howled. One note, long, the boundary call, the sound that meant, this is the edge of where we are, and everything past it is open. Evelina listened to it until it stopped. She had not started this. She had tried, for 4 years, to hold something together that had already decided to come apart. She had carried the work and the silence and the letter she couldn't open and the miscarriage she couldn't name and the knowledge of the cracks that she kept filling because the alternative was standing in the rubble. She was done filling cracks in someone else's foundation. What she had in her coat and in that archive room was not just proof of an old wrong. It was a key. And the door it opened had been locked for 60 years. Inside the hall, she heard Cobb's voice, low and deliberate, giving orders to his people. Outside the capital, the alliances were already fracturing. Celine was consolidating. Riker was reaching for a hand he had already let go. And somewhere in the High Council's law archive, behind 60 years of dust and the careful work of someone who had believed a lie could be buried deep enough to become truth, the original documents were waiting. Evelina pulled her coat closed against the wind. She had 1 week before Celine stopped sending riders and started sending wolves. The elders came in on the 3rd morning. 4 of them, riding in from separate directions, arriving within 2 hours of each other in the way that suggested prior coordination, not orchestrated by Evelina, but by Cobb, who had sent his own riders out the night she told him what the letter contained, operating on a calculation he had been running for 6 years, waiting for a variable that had finally arrived. They were not the wolves Evelina had seen at court. Court wolves wore their politics on the outside, in the cut of their furs, and the specific geometry of how they held themselves in rooms where power was being distributed. These wolves wore theirs underneath, in the way old injuries go underneath the skin and become part of the structure. Elder Voss from the Caro borderlands, gray-bearded and missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a territorial dispute that predated Riker's rule. Elder Marin, the only woman in the group, 58 years old, who had run the Duskfen Pack's eastern operations for 20 years before a land reclassification stripped her authority and handed it to a crown-appointed steward she had never met. Elder Jord from the High North, short and deliberate, who said almost nothing and watched everything. And Elder Sable, who Evelina had not expected and who walked into Cobb's hall and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Sable had been expelled from the capital 4 years ago, the year Evelina arrived. She had always assumed that was coincidence. Standing here now, watching him find his seat at the table with the specific economy of a man who has spent years in small rooms with careful people, she filed that assumption away in the place she kept things that had turned out to be wrong. Cobb opened without ceremony. "She has the documents." The room shifted, not physically. A pressure shift, the kind that happens in a sealed space when something that changes the weight of everything present is named aloud. Evelina laid her father's letter on the table. Then she laid Wren's side-by-side comparison of the 2 treaty documents, the copy Wren had made in precise, clean handwriting on fresh paper because the originals were too fragile for travel. She let them read. The silence while 4 old exiled wolves read 2 pieces of paper was not like other silences. It had texture to it. It had the specific density of people recalculating 60 years of lived experience against a new piece of information, recalculating what they had lost and why they had lost it and how long they had been told the losing was their own fault. Marin set her copy down first. She pressed both hands flat on the table. "Where are the originals?" she said. "The High Council Law Archive," Evelina said. "Sub-level 3, the pre-consolidation treaty vault." "You've been there?" "I've been in the archive. I've seen the vault. I've never had authority to open it." She paused. "The Luna's seal would open it. My seal was valid until Riker formalized the dissolution, which, based on what his writer told me, he has not yet done." The table absorbed that. "He hasn't dissolved the Luna title formally," Sable said. His voice was low, careful, the voice of someone who thinks before each sentence in the particular way of people who have been punished for speaking without thinking. "Which means legally I'm still Luna," Evelina said. "On paper. In the absence of a formal dissolution before the court." "He's been stalling," Cobb said, "because formalizing it requires a High Council ratification, and the Council has 3 members who would challenge the grounds." He looked at Evelina. "They'd challenge it because of Selene." "Selene's legitimacy is the problem," Marin said. "She has no pack standing, no territorial claim, no bloodline that connects to any of the 6 founding packs. Under old law, she cannot be formally recognized as—" "Under old law, the throne itself has a problem," Evelina said quietly. The room went tight. She let it. Then she said, "I need to get into the law archive before Selene moves the documents or seals the vault. And I need witnesses. Witnesses who have legal standing in the High Council's eyes." Sable looked at her with an expression that had something in it she wasn't expecting. "Why are you doing this?" he said. She looked at him. "You walked away," he said. "You had an exit. You took it. You could keep riding north and let it burn." He tilted his head slightly. "So why are you sitting in this room?" It was the honest question. She had known it would come eventually. She had been preparing an answer since the night she read her father's letter. And the answer she had prepared was clean and tactical, because the documents affect every exiled pack, because the proof in the wrong hands becomes a weapon against all of them, because the vacuum Selene is creating will not stop at the capital border. All of that was true. "Because my name is on 8 active treaties," she said. "And when Selene finishes burning the court down, those treaties burn with it. The wolves who depend on those agreements, the Eastern Pack communities, the supply route guarantees, the border healers access protocols, they don't get to walk away from what comes next." She looked at Sable steadily. "I walked away from a man. I didn't walk away from the work." Sable held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Once. Small. It was enough." They left for the capital 4 days later. 7 wolves total. Evelina, Mira, Wren, Cobb, Sable, and two of Cobb's people whose names were Dax and Fen, both in their 30s, both carrying the particular quiet competence of wolves who had done difficult things in difficult places and were not especially interested in discussing it. The journey south was 3 days of hard riding, moving on the old pack trails that ran parallel to the main road and avoided the checkpoint settlements where the Crown's road wardens operated. On the second night, camped in a hollow off the Greywing Trail, Ren came to Evelina with a tightness around her eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. "Someone's been following us," Ren said. "Single rider, staying far enough back to be deniable, close enough to keep pace, since the Harrow crossing." Evelina thought about this. "One of Celine's?" she asked. "Maybe," Ren paused. "Or a watcher. Someone who wants to know where we're going before they decide what to do about it." "Double back at dawn," Evelina said. "I want to know who it is before we get anywhere near the capital." It was Aldrich's man, not a threat, a guide, or that was what he said when Ren and Dax brought him into camp at first light with his hands visible and his horse's reins held by someone else. He was middle-aged, calm in the specific way of professionals who are calm because they've assessed the situation and determined that calm is the correct response, and he carried a letter sealed with the gray seal. Aldrich's message was longer this time. Evelina read it standing up while everyone watched her face. The council session had been called for 7 days from now. Celine had petitioned for a formal recognition of her status as the Alpha King's companion with court authority, the closest thing to a Luna title that could be conferred without the bloodline standing that old law required. 4 council members had agreed to hear the petition. 3 had refused. The 2 remaining votes were uncommitted, and Celine had filed a secondary motion. Evelina read that part twice. "What is it?" Mira said. "Celine has filed a formal treason complaint," Evelina said, "against me." The camp was very quiet. "On what grounds?" Cobb said. "Theft of royal documents, conspiracy with exiled wolves to destabilize the throne." Evelina turned the letter over and checked the back, a habit, checking for postscripts, for the thing that got added when there wasn't enough space on the front. There was a postscript. An unauthorized use of the Luna seal. She had not used her seal. She had not had cause to use it yet, which meant Celine had either fabricated the accusation and was betting no one would investigate closely enough to disprove it, or someone had used Evelina's seal without her knowledge. She looked at the letter in her hand and felt the particular cold that comes not from temperature but from understanding. "She doesn't want to stop me from reaching the archive," Evelina said slowly. "She wants me to arrive under a treason charge. She wants me to walk into that council session already guilty in the room's eyes so that whatever I present can be questioned on grounds of motive." Sable made a sound in his chest, low and hard. "She's been planning this since before the festival," he said. "Yes," Evelina said. "Then the writer Riker sent," Mira said. "The request for you to come back in an advisory capacity was bait," Evelina said, "whether Riker knew it or not." She folded Aldrich's letter. The morning light was coming through the hollow in pale horizontal lines. The horses moved against their ties. Cobb was watching her with the expression of a man who has waited 6 years for a moment and is now wondering if the moment is going to go the way he calculated. She thought about turning around. She thought about it honestly, the full version, not the brief consideration she could dismiss quickly. She held it and looked at it and let it be a real option in her hands. If she turned around, she survived this. The charge would sit on a court ledger no one up here would ever enforce. The documents would eventually be found or destroyed or sealed beyond reach. Celine would consolidate. Riker would burn or be deposed or marry, his undoing. The Eastern Pact communities would lose their treaty protections. The wolves in the Harrow territories would go back to negotiating from weakness, the way they had negotiated before Evelina had spent 2 years building them a stronger position. And she would live in the north, in the cold, with the letter in her coat and the proof she had found and the knowledge of what she had not done. She had walked away from a man without losing herself. She was not going to walk away from the work. "We keep moving," she said, "but we change the route. We go into the capital through the river quarter, not the main gate." She looked at Sable. "I need a contact inside the council building, someone who can get us into the sub-archive without going through the main entrance." "I have someone," Sable said. He said it without hesitation, which told her he had been carrying that contact information for years, waiting. "We have 6 days," she said. "Let's not waste them standing here." They reached the capital's outer edge on the evening of the 5th day. It looked different from the river quarter approach. The palace was visible from here as a weight on the skyline rather than a presence you moved through, distant and massive and lit with the specific kind of light that means a lot of people are awake and moving inside it. The lower settlement was quieter than it should have been for that hour. Shutters closed. The particular careful absence of people on streets where people usually were. Something had already happened. Or something was about to. Sable's contact was a woman named Preth, who met them at a mill house on the river bend and looked at Evelina with the expression of someone trying to determine how much trouble they were about to be in. "The council building is being watched," Preth said. "Selena's people on the main approach. 2 guards on the east corridor entrance who aren't regular palace staff." "The sub-archive entrance," Evelina said. "Still clear, for now." Preth looked at the group. "How many of you are going in?" 3, Evelina said. "Cobb and Sable as witnesses. The rest stay with the horses." Mira's expression made clear that she found this allocation deeply unsatisfactory. "If something goes wrong in there," Mira started. "Then you ride to Aldrich," Evelina said. "You give her the copies Wren made. That's the contingency." Mira pressed her mouth flat. "I know," Evelina said quietly. "Do it anyway." The sub-archive entrance was a servant's door in the west base of the council building, used for supply deliveries, unremarkable to the point of deliberate invisibility. The kind of door that survives 60 years of political upheaval precisely because no one with power thinks about it. Preth got them through. The archive was 3 levels down, and the air changed on each level. The upper floors still carrying the warmth and lamp oil smell of the occupied building above, the middle level going cool and dry, and the bottom level arriving at the specific temperature and stillness of a space where paper and vellum had been kept carefully for a very long time. The pre-consolidation vault was at the far end. Iron door, old lock, the Luna's seal housing set into the wall beside it like a palm print waiting to be matched. Evelina pressed her seal ring to the housing. The mechanism read it. An old system, pure mechanical, no guard required. The seal itself was the authority. The lock turned. The door opened. She went in. The vault was not large. Shelf after shelf of bound documents in varying states of age, organized by year along one wall and by territorial signatory along the other. The pre-consolidation period sat at the far end, bound in dark leather that had gone stiff with age, labeled in a handwriting system she recognized from the archive records upstairs. She found the treaty year in under 4 minutes. She pulled the binding, and she stood there holding it and understood immediately, with a specific full-body understanding that has no room for argument, what she was looking at. The originals were there. Both versions. Side by side in the same binding, which was not how treaty records were organized. Originals and amendments were kept separately, always, because the separation was part of the legal distinction between a founding document and its modification. They were together because someone had put them together deliberately, someone who had access to this vault and the legal standing to open it. Someone who had done this recently. The leather cover left a clean mark on the shelf dust. A settled rectangle that meant this binding had not been moved for years, and then had been moved and replaced, and the replacement was imprecise by a 1/4 inch, the trailing edge catching the dust line incorrectly. Recently. Within the past weeks. Evelina opened the binding. The original treaty was there. Authentic, aged. Exactly as it should be. The amended version was there. And tucked between them, in an envelope sealed with no mark at all, was a document she had never seen before. She broke the seal and unfolded it. It was a signed statement. Formal language, legal phrasing, the structure of an official court document. It named the fraud in precise terms, the altered signatures, the forged ratification, the territorial theft. It named the Ashvale bloodline as the beneficiary. It named Evelina as the author. Her own name. Her handwriting. Or something close enough to her handwriting that a reader who didn't know her intimately would not distinguish it. The Luna seal, pressed cleanly beside the signature. The seal she had not used. The signature she had not written. She stood in the cold of the vault with the document in her hands and felt the architecture of it settle around her. The treason charge, the fake seal use, and now this. A confession document in her own apparent hand, placed in the one location she had been moving toward for 2 weeks, waiting for her to arrive. If she had come here as Luna legitimately with council authority, the document would have been found in her presence, in her access window. With her seal on the envelope she had just opened, she had walked into it exactly as designed. Sable appeared in the vault doorway. He looked at the document in her hand, and his face did something she had no word for. "How long have you known?" she said. "Known what specifically?" he said, very carefully. "That this vault had been accessed," she said. He was quiet for 2 full seconds. 4 days, he said. "Preth told me the night before we rode in." Evelina looked at him. "I thought we could get to the originals before it mattered," he said. "I thought if we had the authentic documents in hand, the planted evidence wouldn't hold." "You thought," she said. "I was wrong," he said. He did not look away from her. He gave her that, at least. The full eye contact of a person owning an error without trying to dilute it with explanation. She looked at the document with her forged name on it. The vault, the archive. The law that was supposed to protect what was true. All of it had been turned into a mechanism, not just against Riker's fraudulent throne, against her. Celine had not tried to stop her coming here. Celine had needed her to come here. The cold of the archive pressed in from all sides, and Evelina understood, with the clean and total clarity of someone who has had every option except one removed, that the woman she had been for 4 years, the woman who worked within systems, who built from the inside, who held things together through patience and precision and the careful accumulation of legitimate proof, that woman was not going to survive what came next. What came next required someone different. She folded the forged document and placed it in her coat beside her father's letter. Then she picked up the original treaty binding. "Witnesses," she said to Cobb and Sable, "both of you. You have seen the contents of this vault with your own eyes. You have seen both versions of the treaty, and you can speak to what the comparison shows." She looked at them, and her voice had a quality it had not had before, stripped of the last of the management, the last of the careful, measured Luna register, down to something below all of that. "When we walk out of here, everything changes. You understand that?" Cobb said, "We understand." "Celine will move tonight," she said. "When her watcher reports we came here, she won't wait for the council session. She'll move to have us taken before I can present anything." She held the binding to her chest, which means we don't wait for the council session either. She walked out of the vault. Behind her, the iron door swung shut on 60 years of buried truth. Ahead of her, somewhere in the lit palace on the skyline, Celine was already receiving a report. And Riker was sitting in the wreckage of everything she had built, finally understanding what it had cost to let it go, too late, and not enough, and reaching for her hand in the dark. She was not going to give it to him, but she was going to use every weapon the situation had just handed her, including the forged document in her coat, including the treason charge with her name on it, including the fact that Celine had just made the mistake of designing a trap that required Evelina to be passive to work. She was done being passive. She emerged into the cold night air of the river quarter with the original treaties under her arm and the specific forward momentum of someone who has just decided, fully and without remainder, exactly who they are willing to become. They moved before the hour turned. Preth knew the river quarter's back channels the way a person knows the inside of a recurring dream. Not because they were mapped, but because she had run them enough times that her body had memorized the decisions before her mind caught up. She took them through a tannery yard, across a lumber bridge that creaked under the horses like it was registering a complaint, and into the lower mill district where the buildings pressed close enough together that a rider moving between them was invisible from any angle more than 30 feet out. Mira fell in beside Evelina the moment they cleared the archive building. She said nothing. She looked at the binding under Evelina's arm and at Evelina's face, and she read both with the accuracy of 12 years, and then she looked forward and kept writing. That was why Evelina had kept her. Ren was on the rear, tracking behind them at a distance, watching the street approaches. Dax had gone ahead to check the safe house Preth had arranged. Fen rode point beside Preth, one hand loose near his belt, the specific posture of a man who is not anticipating trouble, but has already decided what he'll do when it arrives. Cobb rode beside Sable in silence. They were old wolves who had been waiting for this specific moment for different lengths of time, and the waiting had made them patient, and the patience had made them quiet, and the quiet now had the specific weight of men who understand that the next few hours will determine whether 6 years of exile meant anything. Evelina thought about the forged document in her coat. Celine had made a mistake, not in the design. The design was precise, the kind of precision that comes from genuine intelligence operating over extended time. The mistake was in the assumption underneath the design, that Evelina would arrive at the vault frightened, off balance, caught, that the treason charge and the planted evidence would paralyze her the way a trap paralyzes an animal, through the sudden understanding of enclosure. Celine had studied the Luna. She had not studied the wolf. The safe house was a cooperage on the river's north bend, owned by a man Preth introduced only as Vale, who looked at 7 wolves arriving in his yard at midnight and responded with the expression of a man who had been told to expect this and was nonetheless finding the reality of it somewhat more than the description had suggested. He took their horses without comment and pointed them to the loft above the main work floor. They went up. The loft smelled of sawdust and river damp, and the previous occupants of the bedrolls stacked against the far wall. A single oil lamp hung from the center beam. They gathered under it, and the light made their faces sharp and sectioned. "Talk," Cobb said. Evelina set the treaty binding on the floor between them. Then she set the forged document beside it. The difference in paper quality was visible even in lamplight. The original treaty pages, aged and precise, the forged document on stock that was newer, the ink sitting on the surface in a way that aged documents never had. "She needed me to open the vault," Evelina said. "My seal on the access record. My presence in the archive. The planted document found in my access window. If I'd come in the front way with council witnesses under formal Luna authority, the entire sequence would have completed itself. Treason charge. Physical evidence. My own seal validating the evidence chain." She looked at the group. "She's been building this since before the festival." "The festival was the trigger," Sable said, "not the plan." "The festival gave Riker a reason to move," Evelina said, "which gave Celine the chaos she needed to execute a plan she had already built." She paused. "Riker thinks he's the one who acted. He doesn't know he was moved." The lamp flame moved in a draft from the floorboards. "The council session is in 2 days," Mira said. "If you walk in there with the treason charge pending." "I'm not waiting for the council session," Evelina said. The room was still. "The session is a controlled environment," she said. "Celine controls 4 of the 9 council votes. She controls the guard rotation on the chamber. She controls the agenda. I walk in there under a treason charge with documents she can argue were stolen and a forged confession she can present before I have the floor." She shook her head. She designed the session as the final room, the place where the evidence converges and the verdict is written before anyone speaks. "So you don't walk into her room," Cobb said. "I build my own," Evelina said. She looked at Sable. "The High Alpha gathering, the one Aldrich mentioned in her first message, the rival alphas who've been watching the Alliance's fracture. They're not in the capital yet, but they're close. They came for the council session, but they've been waiting in the outer territories for 3 days." She paused. "I need them in one room before the council convenes." "That's not a council session," Sable said slowly. That's a challenge gathering," Cobb said. A challenge gathering was older than the council system, older than the throne itself. It was the mechanism that predated formal government, the direct assembly of alpha leaders to hear a grievance against a ruling power and render a collective judgment that no single council could override. It had not been invoked in 40 years. It could not be blocked by a sitting king or canceled by a court motion. It existed outside the system it had once created. To invoke it required a claimant in good standing, a formal grievance, and the physical presence of no fewer than 5 alpha leaders willing to hear the case. Evelina had 3 exiled elders with alpha standing. She needed 2 more. "Aldrich," Mira said quietly. "And who else?" Wren said. "The Greymount Alpha," Sable said. "Herrick. He withdrew from the Alliance 3 days after the festival. He's been in the outer territories for a week. He came to watch, not to support Celine. If he was supporting Celine, he would have stayed. His withdrawal was a statement." He looked at Evelina. "He'll hear a challenge gathering if someone he respects invites him." "Do you have that standing with him?" she asked. Sable breathed in slowly. "I did, before my exile." "Is it still there?" A pause. "One way to find out," he said. Sable left before dawn with Dax and a letter written in Evelina's hand, sealed with her seal, making the formal invocation in the precise old language that challenge gathering law required. The language was archaic, almost formal to the point of stiffness, but every word was load-bearing. Leave one out, and the invocation lost its legal standing. Evelina wrote it from memory. She had read the old law text during her second year as Luna, sitting in the archive on afternoons when Riker was in territorial meetings and the court was quiet, reading the structures that predated the current system the way an architect reads the original plans of a building they've been asked to manage. She had read them because she believed in understanding the full depth of the foundation. She had not imagined at the time that she would one day be invoking them against the building itself. Mira watched her seal the letter. He won't know what it means when it arrives, Mira said. Riker, when he hears a challenge gathering has been called, he won't understand the mechanism. He'll understand when Selene does, Evelina said. Which is when? When it's too late to stop it. Mira was quiet for a moment, then, and if Herrick says no? Then we go to the council session and we fight on their ground with what we have, Evelina said. And we lose harder than we would have otherwise. She folded her hands around the warm lamp base and felt the heat push back against the cold in her palms. But he won't say no. She said it without bravado. She said it the way you state a structural fact. Herrick said yes. Sable returned at midday with the answer, and 2 of Herrick's wolves riding behind him, the formal escort that in old custom signified an Alpha's commitment to attend. They were large, weathered, wearing the Greymount territorial markings on their riding leathers, and they looked at Evelina in Vale's loft with the specific assessing regard of wolves who have been sent to determine whether the person their Alpha is committing to is worth the commitment. She gave them her face flat and level and let them look. They looked. Then they nodded to each other, the small private communication of people who have just confirmed a shared assessment, and they stationed themselves at the loft entrance and said nothing further. He wants it done tonight, Sable said, before Selene finds out it's been called. He says if she gets a full day to prepare a counter-response, the gathering loses its momentum. He's right, Evelina said. Tonight. The location, Cobb said. A challenge gathering requires neutral ground, not the palace, not any Pax territorial seat. The river amphitheater, Preth said from the corner where she'd been sitting in the specific quiet of a person contributing only when they had something worth contributing. South of the Mill District, built 90 years ago for the border festivals. It's been empty for 2 decades. Neutral. No one's claimed it. It's old enough that its construction predates the Asheville consolidation. It was the right answer. Evelina could see it immediately. Get word to Aldrich, she said to Mira. Tell her the gathering is tonight at the river amphitheater. Tell her what I'm presenting and what I need from her. She paused. Tell her if she comes, she needs to come ready to speak. I need her voice, not just her presence. Mira was already reaching for paper. The day moved like water under ice. The surface still, everything underneath running hard and fast and cold. Evelina sat with the original treaty binding for 2 hours in the afternoon, not reading, just thinking through the sequence. The way a surgeon doesn't rush their preparation. The case she was about to make was not complicated. The documents made it simple. The comparison made it clear. The forged ratification signatures were visible to any witness who looked. But simple was not the same as safe, and clear was not the same as unstoppable. And she had learned in 4 years of court work that the truth of a thing and the reception of that truth were 2 entirely separate problems. She needed the gathering to see the documents before Selene's people could reach the room. She needed the forged confession in her coat presented in the right sequence, not as evidence of her guilt, but as evidence of Selene's reach into the archive and the law itself. And she needed Riker. This was the calculation she had been avoiding. She had not been avoiding it because it was complicated. She had been avoiding it because it required her to want something she had told herself she no longer wanted, and the telling had not yet become entirely true. She needed Riker in that gathering because without him the case was an exile's grievance, provable but easy to frame as politically motivated. With him, with the Alpha King himself facing the evidence of what his bloodline was built on, unable to deny it before 5 Alpha witnesses, the case became what it actually was. A reckoning. She sent for him through the one channel she was certain Selene didn't control. The old courier line that ran from the river quarter to the palace's eastern servants' entrance, a communication channel that had existed since the first year of Evelina's tenure, and that she had used for correspondence she wanted to keep off the main record. She didn't ask him to support her. She asked him to come. The river amphitheater was everything Preth had described, and everything 4 years of disuse looked like in late autumn. The stone tiers grown with moss on the north-facing sides, the central floor swept clear by wind and nothing else, the old torch brackets along the entrance arch holding nothing but oxidized iron. Cobb's people lit fires in 4 corners using wood from the cooperage. The light they threw was uneven and orange and moved constantly in the river wind coming off the water, which was audible from here, a low continuous presence beneath everything. The Alpha leaders arrived in the hour before midnight. Herrick was first. He He was broad and deliberate, and he moved into the amphitheater the way experienced leaders move into uncertain spaces, scanning, reading, committing to nothing until he had the full geometry of it. He looked at Evelina and said nothing. He found a position on the second tier and he waited. Aldrich arrived with 2 of her council staff, gray-cloaked and sharp-eyed, and she looked at Evelina with an expression that carried the specific warmth of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular type of correct decision to be made. "You look terrible," Aldrich said. "I've been riding for 2 weeks," Evelina said. "You look like someone who's about to do something irreversible." "Yes," Evelina said. Aldrich almost smiled. "Good." Cobb, Sable, and Marin took their positions. 7 wolves now in the old stone bowl of the amphitheater, the fires holding the dark back on 4 sides, the river saying its continuous word to the night. And then Riker arrived. He came alone. This was unexpected, and it told her things she didn't have time to fully process. He had come without guard, without court escort, wearing riding clothes without insignia, and he moved into the amphitheater with the specific careful movement of a man walking into a room where he doesn't know the rules and knows it. He looked older than she remembered. It had been 3 weeks. 3 weeks was not long enough to make a man look older, but he looked it anyway, which meant she was seeing something that had been there for longer, seeing it now because she was no longer inside the daily proximity that makes familiar things invisible. He stopped when he saw the gathering. He looked at the alpha leaders on the stone tiers. He looked at the original treaty binding in Evelina's hands. He looked at her face. "What is this?" he said. "A challenge gathering," she said. His jaw tightened. 1 degree. She knew that specific tightening. She had seen it 100 times, usually in council sessions when something arrived that he hadn't been informed of, and he was deciding whether to manage it or react. "You invoked a challenge gathering," he said. Not a question. 4 days ago, she said. "When your people were following me north, and Celine was filing treason charges in my name for actions I didn't take." He looked at the gathering again. The calculation behind his eyes was visible. Not the content, but the fact of it. The rapid structural assessment of someone realizing how many pieces had been moved without their knowledge. This was the moment she had thought about in the archive vault. The moment that required her to be the version of herself she had been building since the night she left. Not the patient careful Luna who managed systems from inside, but the wolf who understood that some rooms needed to be entered with everything on the table. "Riker," she said, and her voice had nothing performative left in it. No court register, no managed measure. "Sit down. And listen, because what I'm about to show this gathering destroys either you or her, and which one it destroys depends on whether you have the spine right now to see what's actually in front of you." The amphitheater was absolutely still. Riker looked at her for a long time. Then he sat. She laid the documents out on the central floor where every alpha leader could see them. She explained the comparison. She explained what the altered signatures meant, and what they had enabled, and what had been taken from the packs whose seal marks had been forged on the ratification document. She explained it without heat and without performance, and she watched the faces of the people around the stone tiers, and she saw the moment the weight of it landed in each of them. Not the same moment for each, because some arrived at it through the legal analysis, and some through the territorial math, and Herrick arrived at it through something more personal, something in the way his expression changed when he looked at the forged signatures and recognized the seal of a pack he knew. Riker sat still through all of it. His face was the most controlled thing in the room. She gave him that. Whatever was happening underneath it, he held the surface with the practice of a man who had worn a crown since birth. But she knew his body, had known it for 4 years, and she could see the specific tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands, resting on his knees, had gone slightly too still. He was working very hard not to react. When she finished, she looked at him directly. "You didn't know," she said. It was not a question and not an absolution. It was a statement of what she believed to be true, offered without gentleness, because the gentleness would have made it something it wasn't. "No," he said. His voice was level and cost him something to keep that way. "I did not know." "Celine did," Evelina said. "She found the same records before I did. That's why she wanted the court position, not because she wanted you, because the person who controls the archive, who controls what information reaches the High Council, who controls the evidence chain, that person controls whether this surfaces or stays buried." She paused. "You handed her the inside of your court, and you didn't know what she was going to do with it." Riker's eyes were on her, something in them that she did not have a clean word for. Not regret. Regret was too small. The thing in his eyes was the specific expression of a person who has just understood the full architecture of an error they cannot unmake. Herrick spoke from the second tier. The treason charge, filed by Celine using my seal, Evelina said. She pulled the forged confession document from her coat and held it up. And this, a fabricated confession document planted in the Law Archive vault and designed to be found by me during access, establishing evidence of guilt in my own apparent hand. She set it on the floor beside the original documents. The ink age on this document is 6 weeks maximum. I have not been in the capital in 6 weeks. Cobb said, I witnessed the vault. I can speak to the access conditions and the condition of the document when it was found. Sable said the same. Aldrich said, I will verify the paper stock with the council archivist. Tonight, before any other access occurs. The gathering moved through its formal steps with the specific momentum of a mechanism that has been waiting a long time to engage. Each alpha leader stated their position. Each acknowledgement of the evidence was given in the old formal language, the words that created legal records simply by being spoken in this context before these witnesses. Riker said nothing through any of it. He was looking at the forged document on the floor. He was looking at it the way you look at something that has caused damage you can't yet fully measure. When the last alpha had spoken, the gathering produced what it was designed to produce, a formal collective judgment that superseded the council's pending session, that nullified the treason charge by establishing a competing chain of evidence, and that referred the original treaty fraud to a joint investigation under the authority of the assembled alpha leaders rather than any single court. It was not a conviction, it was not a resolution, but it was a weapon, and it was in Evelina's hands, and Celine did not know it existed yet. The fires burned down. The river moved in the dark beyond the walls. The alpha leaders moved toward the exits in small clusters, speaking in low voices with the focused intensity of people processing the implications of what they had just witnessed. Riker remained sitting. Evelina stood in the center of the old stone floor and waited. He looked up at her. She's going to move tonight, he said, when her watcher reports what happened here. I know, Evelina said. She has 12 wolves in the palace who are hers, not mine. I thought they were mine. His voice carried the specific flatness of a man who has been forced to revise a fundamental assumption and hasn't yet decided whether to be ashamed of the revision or only of the original error. She built a parallel structure inside my court, and I didn't see it. No, Evelina said. You didn't. He looked at her for a long moment. I need your help. I know you do, she said. She let that sit. She let the full weight of it rest in the air between them, the specific heaviness of a man who had put his crest on another woman in front of 1,000 witnesses asking the woman he had done it to for help, and the specific quality of silence in which she stood while she looked at him. She was not going to punish him by refusing. She was not going to punish him at all. That was not what this was about, had never been what it was about. But she was going to be clear. I'm not doing this for you, she said. I'm doing this because the packs I protected for 4 years don't deserve to burn because of what you chose. And because Celine with full control of the throne and the archive is a worse outcome for every wolf in this kingdom than the alternative. He held her gaze. I understand. Do you? She said. He said nothing. Because understanding means accepting that what happens next is not about recovering your position, she said, or mine. It's about what comes after both of us. It's about whether there's a kingdom worth governing when this is over. She held the treaty binding and the forged document, one in each hand balanced. Can you do that? The fire in the nearest corner threw a long orange shadow across the stone floor between them. Riker stood. He had a cut above his left ear she hadn't noticed when he arrived. Recent, half-dried, the kind of injury that happens in a hurry in a confined space. Someone had already gotten hands on him. Someone who had known he was leaving the palace tonight. He looked at the wound without touching it, which told her he hadn't known it was visible. She already knows, he said, very quiet, that you came here? That I was going to. He paused. She had someone in the eastern corridor when I left. I got past them. His expression was carefully controlled in the way of a man managing a specific kind of fear. Not the fear of injury, but the fear of having been comprehensively wrong about something, and all the structures that built on top of that wrong thing. She has the palace, Evelina. My own walls. The sounds from outside the amphitheater changed. It was subtle, a shift in the ambient noise of the river quarter, the specific quality of a street going quiet in the particular way streets go quiet when people move off them quickly and intentionally. Wren appeared at the archway entrance, moving fast, her face carrying the expression Evelina had learned to read in 8 months as the precursor to bad information delivered quickly. 12 wolves moving from the palace district, Wren said. Armed, not in guard colors, moving fast toward the river quarter. Celine's 12. Evelina looked at Riker. He looked back at her. And the 4 corner fires burned and the river moved, and somewhere above them the capital held its breath, and every path they had taken to reach this specific stone floor had been converging to this single point. And the choice in front of them now was not whether to fight, but only how. And the answer to that was a thing that would determine not just who survived tonight, but what kind of kingdom was left standing when the morning came. Stand up straight, she said to Riker. Her voice was stripped of everything except what was necessary. You are still the Alpha King. Act like it. He straightened. She turned to face the entrance. Outside, the sound of boots on stone, moving fast, getting closer. Inside, 7 wolves and 1 former king, and the truth written on old paper in her hands, and everything about to break open at once. They came through the archway 12 strong, and the first thing Evelina noticed was that they were not wearing masks. Celine had not told them to hide their faces. That meant either she was confident this would be contained before witnesses could matter, or she had stopped caring about the kind of evidence that faces left behind. Both possibilities landed in Evelina's chest with the same cold weight. The lead wolf was a man she recognized. Brant. He had been on the palace guard rotation for 3 years, a senior position, one she had seen at ceremony and corridor, and twice at the Eastern Treaty signings where she had needed a reliable body in the room. He had stood at the door of her office on more than one occasion. He had been courteous, professional. He was looking at her now with the specific, careful blankness of someone who has made a decision and is not going to let himself examine it. By order of the court companion Celine, Brant said, Evelina Ashford is to be detained pending the council's review of the treason charge. Resistance will be... Stop, Riker said. His voice hit the amphitheater the way alpha voices hit enclosed stone spaces. Not loud, but complete, filling every corner, leaving no gap for ambient sound to fill. It was the voice he used when he was not performing authority, but simply being it, the voice Evelina had heard in its genuine form exactly 7 times in 4 years, always at moments when something real was at stake. Brant stopped. He looked at Riker. Something moved through his face. Not doubt exactly. Recalculation. My king, Brant said carefully. Those wolves beside you, Riker said. Look at them. Look at where they're standing. He did not raise his voice. He moved forward 2 steps, into the firelight, and the cut above his ear was visible, and the riding clothes without insignia were visible, and everything about him was stripped of the ceremonial distance that made it possible to treat an Alpha King as an abstraction rather than a man. You came into a challenge gathering with weapons drawn. You came to take a woman who invoked the oldest law this kingdom has, in front of 5 Alpha witnesses. Brant's jaw worked. That's not a court order, Riker said. That's a coup. And you know the difference. The 12 wolves were very still. Herrick stepped forward from the second tier, then Aldrich, then Cobb, moving with the deliberate weight of a man who has waited 6 years to stand somewhere that mattered. One by one, the Alpha witnesses placed themselves visible, present, their faces in the firelight available to every one of Brant's wolves to see and remember. Brant looked at the witnesses. He looked at Riker. He looked at Evelina. He lowered his weapon. Not all 12 followed immediately. 2 at the back held for 3 more seconds, the specific hesitation of people running a fast calculation about which side of a line was safer to be on. Then they followed. Go back to the palace, Riker said. Tell whoever sent you that the gathering has concluded its formal business. Tell them the documentation is in the hands of 5 Alpha witnesses and has already been formally recorded. He paused. And tell Celine that I'm coming. Brant left. His wolves left with him, moving back through the archway with the careful, controlled pace of men who are not retreating, but who understand that the moment has concluded in a way they did not arrive expecting. The amphitheater held its breath for a moment after the sound of their boots faded. Then Wren exhaled from somewhere behind Evelina, and the sound broke the held air loose, and the space became a room again rather than a held position. Riker took the palace through the eastern servants' entrance at the second hour of the morning, with Evelina beside him, Cobb and Sable, and Herrick's 2 escort wolves behind, and the specific quality of forward momentum that belongs to people who have run out of the option of waiting. The eastern corridor was empty in the way that meant it had been recently vacated rather than simply unused. Doors stood fractionally open. A lamp at the far end had been burning too long without being tended and was throwing a thin smoke line toward the ceiling. Someone had been here and left in a hurry, which meant word had moved faster than Brandt's retreat. Celine knew. Riker moved without speaking. He knew his own palace the way Evelina had known the festival courtyard. The particular knowledge of a body that has moved through a space so many times that the spatial memory runs below thought. He led them through the eastern corridor and into the main hall approach, and up the secondary staircase that bypassed the throne room entirely, and arrived at the upper council corridor from the north side. The council chamber door was open. Inside, 4 of Celine's court supporters stood with their backs to the far wall, and Celine stood at the head of the council table with the specific stillness of a woman who has already decided how this room ends. She was dressed formally. That was the first thing. She had put on the full court dress, deep red, the one she had worn at the festival, and her hair was arranged and her posture was perfect, and she looked at Riker entering the room with an expression that had no fear in it whatsoever. That was what made her dangerous. Not the planning, not the intelligence, not the archive access or the forged documents or the 12 wolves she had sent to the amphitheater. It was the absence of fear. Evelina had known people without fear before, and she had learned to recognize what it actually was. Not courage, not strength, but the specific condition of someone who no longer cared sufficiently about outcomes to be afraid of them. Someone who had moved past the point where loss registered as loss. Those people were not stopped by threat. They were stopped by removal. Riker, Celine said, her voice was even. You left without your guard. I know, he said. That was unwise. A lot of things I've done recently were unwise, he said. He came to the center of the room and stopped. Step away from the table. Celine looked at the treaty binding in Evelina's hands. She looked at it the way someone looks at a thing they have been preparing for. Not surprised, but doing the final calculation on how the preparation performed against reality. Whatever she told you, Celine said, the treason charge stands until the council. The challenge gathering nullified the treason charge 2 hours ago, Evelina said. The formal record was witnessed by 5 Alpha leaders. Herrick of Greymount, Elder Aldrich of the North Middle Territories, Elder Cobb, Elder Sable, Elder Marin, recorded in the old gathering language and sealed under 5 marks. She set the treaty binding on the nearest council chair, not the table, deliberate, not giving Celine the symbolic center. The charge is gone. Celine's expression did not change. This was the calculation running, Evelina knew. The fast internal reassessment of available options when one path closes. The documents in that binding, Celine said, were removed from the law archive without, under the Luna seal, Evelina said, which is still valid, because you didn't complete the formal dissolution. You were too busy managing the council petition and the treason charge and the amphitheater operation to finish the one legal step that would have actually protected your position. The room was very quiet. Celine looked at Evelina. Evelina looked back. It was the second time they had held each other's eyes. The first had been at the Moonfire Festival, 3 seconds in the torchlight, Evelina giving nothing and Celine taking the measure of a woman she had spent 2 years studying from a distance and was now meeting at close range for the first time. What Celine had seen then, Evelina didn't know. What she saw now in Celine's eyes was not fear and not defeat. It was recognition. The specific recognition of one precise mind encountering another and finding it equal, and finding that equality insufficient to change what was already decided. You're going to exile me, Celine said. To Riker, not to Evelina. Riker said, yes. Beyond the forbidden borders. Yes. Celine breathed in slowly through her nose. She looked at Riker with something that was almost, in its own stripped way, honest. I would have made you stronger, she said. You would have made me yours, he said. That's not the same thing. Something shifted in Celine's face, so small and so fast that if Evelina hadn't been watching with the full quality of attention she had developed over 4 years of courtrooms and subtext, and the spaces between what people said and what they meant, she would have missed it. Celine had loved him, or something close enough to love that the distinction didn't matter to the person carrying it. That didn't change anything. Evelina had known women who loved men and burned kingdoms for that love, and believed the burning was justified by the feeling. The feeling was real, and the damage was real, and both things were true simultaneously, and neither truth canceled the other. She felt no contempt for Celine. She felt the specific, clear recognition of a person who had made a different choice in the same conditions and who understood precisely how the other choice felt from the inside. Celine looked at her one more time. Then she stepped away from the table. The exile processing took 3 hours, formal and documented, the kind of thing that leaves a record because the record is the point. Aldrich managed it with the council staff that remained, the ones who had not been part of Celine's parallel structure, and by the time the eastern sky was beginning its argument with the dark, the documentation was complete. Celine was taken to the northern gate by 4 of Herrick's wolves and 2 of Cobb's. She did not speak during the escort. She walked with her back straight, and her face arranged into the expression of someone who has decided that what other people see of them in the final moments is still something they control. Evelina did not watch her leave. She was in the Eastern Archive room with Wren and the treaty documents, beginning the process of formal chain of custody documentation, because the work did not pause for the drama that surrounded it, and because the work was, in the end, the actual point. Mira found her there an hour later and stood in the doorway. "It's done," Mira said. Evelina set down the pen. "The council? Convening at dawn. The 5 Alpha witnesses are staying. Herrick is staying." Mira paused. "Aldrich says the joint investigation into the original treaty fraud will take months. The territorial restitution process, if it proceeds, will take years." "It will proceed," Evelina said. "Yes," Mira said. "I think it will." They were quiet together in the archive room with its smell of old paper and the lamp burning between them. "Riker wants to see you," Mira said. Evelina looked at the document spread across the table. The original treaty, 60 years old, the altered version beside it, the forged confession in its own separate sealed envelope now, labeled in Wren's precise handwriting for the investigation record. "I know," she said. "Otiek." He was in the map room. This surprised her, and also didn't. It was the room where the territorial work happened. The room with the long table and the wall-sized maps and the specific combination of scale and detail that made the kingdom legible as a thing that could be managed rather than a thing that happened to you. It was the room where she had spent more of her 4 years than any other. He was standing at the window when she entered, looking out at the sky going gray-pink above the eastern ridgeline, the specific color of a morning that has not yet decided what kind of day it will become. He heard her and turned. He looked like what he was, a man who had not slept and who was carrying the first full weight of a reckoning he had been building toward for longer than he'd known. There was something in his face that had not been there before. She looked at it carefully and identified it after a moment as the particular expression of a person who has had a central belief about themselves removed and not yet built a replacement. He had believed he was a good king, or if not good, then necessary, the kind that made hard choices without flinching. The kind whose cruelties were calculated rather than careless. He was learning at this hour with the sky going pale behind him that calculated cruelty was its own kind of carelessness. "I didn't know about the treaty," he said. "My grandfather. I need you to know I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't know what you were doing for 4 years. The work, the Eastern Pacts, the records Mira kept." He stopped. "I thought the kingdom functioned because I ran it." "The kingdom functioned because a lot of people ran it," she said. "You were one of them." He flinched, small, controlled, real. "I put my crest on her in front of everyone you had ever worked with," he said. "I didn't give you the courtesy of a private conversation or a warning or, He stopped himself. "There is no version of that I can explain into something better than what it was." "No," she said. "There isn't. I'm sorry." She looked at him. The apology sat in the air between them, and she examined it the way she examined all important things, carefully, without the distortion of wanting it to be more or less than it was. It was real. She could hear that it was real. 4 years of reading this man's registers had given her the ability to distinguish his genuine from his performed, and this was genuine, stripped of strategy, the kind of sorry that costs something to say because the person saying it has no expectation of what it will buy them. "I know," she said. "Is that enough?" he asked. She thought about this carefully. "It's enough for what it is," she said. "It's not enough to be what you want it to be." She looked at him without hardness and without softness, just the clear, direct regard of one person seeing another completely. You can't sorry your way back into the thing that was. That thing is over. He nodded, slowly, once, the nod of a man accepting weight. The crown, he said. She waited. Aldrich suggested a ruling council, he said. Elected representation from the Pax. No bloodline claim. No single alpha authority. He was quiet for a moment. She said it was your idea. From a conversation 2 weeks ago. It was a suggestion, Evelina said, based on what I saw when I was doing the work. The kingdom doesn't fail because of bad kings. It fails because the structure puts too much weight in one place. One bloodline, one seat, one crest on one person. She paused. The weight broke things long before I came along. And me, he said. And you, she said. He looked at the window. The sky was committing now, fully pale, the kind of flat white morning that comes after a long cold night. I'll step down, he said, if that's what the council process requires. It may, she said. Will you sit on the council? She had been thinking about this since the archive, since the moment she stood in the vault with the forged document in her hands and understood that the version of herself she had been was not equipped for what came next. She had been thinking about it, and she had arrived somewhere between the archive and this room at the answer. No, she said. He looked at her. The council needs wolves who haven't been defined by this court, she said. It needs voices from the exiled Pax, from the territorial communities, from the Eastern healers and the border settlements. It doesn't need the former Luna sitting at the head of another table in another version of the same room. She paused. That's not what I'm for. Then what are you for, he said. Not dismissive, genuinely asking. She thought of Carn Hollow, the stone-floored hall and Cobb's 7 wolves, and the way they had looked at her not as a crown, but as a person who had walked through a door with something real in her hands. She thought of Wren at the archive table finding the thread that mattered, this girl who had spent a year being afraid to speak in full sentences and had grown, in the specific conditions of being treated as capable, into someone who could read a 60-year-old forgery in lamplight and name it accurately. She thought of all the wolves she had not yet met, the ones pushed to the edges by a system that had been running on a fraud since before any of them were born, the ones who had been negotiating from weakness and would now, with the territorial restitution process and the new council and the cracked open archive, be negotiating from something closer to ground truth. I'm going north, she said. I'm going back to the exiled territories and I'm going to build something. Not a power structure, not a court, a place where the wolves who fell through the cracks of this system can land and have standing and have someone in their corner when the new councils start making the decisions that will shape the next 60 years. She met Riker's eyes. The work doesn't stop because the crisis is over. It changes shape. He looked at her for a long time. You're the best leader this kingdom ever had, he said. Very quiet. And I spent 4 years not knowing it. She felt that land. She let it land, the full weight of it, because she had spent a long time not allowing herself to receive that kind of truth. She had carried the work in silence because silence had felt safer than the alternative, and the alternative had felt like need, and need had felt like weakness, and she had not been able to afford weakness in the structure she was operating inside. She was outside that structure now. I know I was, she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said in years. He almost smiled. What arrived on his face instead was something quieter than a smile and more durable, a recognition without performance. What do I do? He said. With all of it. She looked at this man she had lived beside for 4 years, this difficult and capable and profoundly flawed person who had built his sense of himself on foundations he hadn't chosen and hadn't examined, and she thought about what it was going to cost him to stay here and face what came next. The investigation, the restitution, the dismantling of the bloodline claim, the daily work of governing a kingdom that now knew the ground it stood on was borrowed. He could walk away from it. She could see that he was thinking about it. Running was understandable. Running was what people did when the full weight of a reckoning arrived and the body understood before the mind that there was no comfortable version of what came next. But running was also a choice that would follow him, and he had already made enough choices that followed him. Stay, she said. Not for me. Not for the crown. Stay because the Pax in this kingdom deserve to have the person who benefited from the fraud present while it gets undone. Stay because absence is its own kind of statement, and you have made enough statements that cost other people. She held his gaze. Do the hard version. You know how. He breathed in slowly. He nodded. She turned and walked to the door. Evelina, he said. She stopped but did not turn. I hope it's good, he said. What you build. She stood there for a moment with her hand near the door frame and the morning light coming gray and honest through the map room window, and everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks, settling into the specific stillness of things that have been decided and cannot be undecided. It will be, she said, and she walked out. But she left the Capitol on the same gray morning, before the council convened, before the formal proceedings began, before the machinery of what came next could generate reasons for her to stay. Mira and Ren rode with her. Ren had the original treaty documents in a locked saddle pack, carrying them north to Cobb for the investigation record. Mira had the correspondence from Aldrich and 2 signed letters from council members who wanted to open formal communication with whatever Evelina built next. They rode through this lower settlement as the morning stalls were opening, the vendors setting out their goods with the specific automatic efficiency of people who do the same work every day regardless of what the palace was doing the night before. An old woman spreading river-dried fish on a board looked up as they passed and recognized Evelina and said nothing, just looked. And then, when Evelina had gone 3 steps past her, said, "Good riding, Luna." Evelina turned her head. The old woman had already gone back to her fish. She was not the Luna anymore. She had not been for 3 weeks. But the word had been used without deference, without calculation, without the specific freight of court titles. It had been used the way you use a person's true name when you want them to know you see them. She carried it. They cleared the city gate and the road opened north, and the cold came at them clean and direct from the ridge. And Evelina felt her wolf settle in her chest with the deep-rooted ease of an animal that has been running too long in a confined direction and has finally been given open ground. Not relief. Relief implied she had been waiting to feel better. This was something older than relief. This was the specific quality of a person who has been carrying something at an angle that worked against the body. For so long they'd forgotten the weight of it, finally setting it down and standing straight. She had loved Riker. She had loved the work. She had loved the version of herself that the work had made her. Capable and precise and unwilling to stop. She had lost the man and kept the version of herself, and the work had not ended, only changed direction, and she was riding toward the thing it was going to become next. She thought about the old woman's fish, the vendor's automatic hands, the ordinary work of ordinary mornings that kept happening regardless of what the palace decided. She thought about what it meant to build something that served those mornings. Not the ceremonial court life, not the treaty language and alpha gatherings and archive vaults, but the daily ground-level maintenance of a life worth living. That was what the sanctuary would be. She had not named it yet. She would know the name when she arrived and saw the land and understood what it needed to be called. She thought about the wolves she was riding toward. The exiled, the expelled, the ones the system had decided were inconvenient. She thought about what it meant to be inconvenient to a fraudulent structure, what it actually meant, stripped of the shame they had been made to carry about it. It meant they had been correct. The ridge came closer and the sky above it was full white now, committed to this particular version of cold gray morning, and Ren was riding on her right and Mira on her left, and neither of them was speaking because they had been moving together long enough to know when speech was the point and when the moving itself was enough. Evelina thought about the crown she had left at Riker's feet. She thought about the weight of it, the specific pressure of metal on bone that she had felt for 4 years as the physical marker of everything she was supposed to be. She had not missed it, not once in 3 weeks. She had expected to, and she hadn't, and this absence of expected grief had told her something about the difference between what she had wanted and what she had been serving. She had not wanted the crown. She had wanted the work the crown was supposed to enable. The work had not required the crown. This was the thing she was still learning how to hold, that the capability had been hers from the beginning, not conferred by the position, not dependent on the seat or the title or the man who had given her the formal standing to occupy the rooms where decisions happened. The rooms were one place decisions could happen. There were others. She was riding toward them. Somewhere behind her, the Capitol was waking up fully into the morning of what came after. Council members arriving at the chamber. Aldrich managing the chain of custody on the treaty documents. Herrick and Cobb and Sable sitting at a table built from old law and beginning the slow, necessary work of restitution. Riker standing in a room where the shape of his inheritance had just been accurately described for the first time, deciding what kind of man he was going to be inside that description. She did not know how it would go. She knew how her piece of it would go. She would build. She would gather the wolves who had been pushed to the edges, and she would give them standing, and she would fight for the restitution process from the outside the way she had once fought for the court from the inside. And the work would be slow and difficult, and some days it would feel like walking into the wind with nothing to show for it. She had done that before. She knew how to do it. The road curved north, and the settlement fell away behind them, and the open territory opened ahead, ridge and tree, and the specific beautiful severity of land that had not been managed into submission, and Evelina breathed in through her nose, slowly, filling her chest with the cold, clean air of a morning that was entirely hers. Her wolf lifted its head, not the pacing urgency of the Moonfire Festival night, not the patient-held stillness of the archive, not the high-alert focus of the amphitheater. Something older and quieter than all of those. Satisfaction. Not the triumphant kind. Not the kind you perform for an audience. The kind that sits in the chest of a person who has gone all the way through a hard thing and arrived on the other side still themselves. Still the version of themselves they recognized. Still holding the values they had gone in with. Still capable of the quality of work they had always been capable of. But lighter now, stripped of the weight of the wrong container. She had not survived Riker's betrayal. Survival implied she had been passive in the outcome. She had chosen it, every step of it, the crown at his feet, the road north, the archive, the gathering, the map room in the gray morning. Every step had been a choice made by a woman who knew her own worth well enough not to spend a single additional hour arguing for it to someone who had already decided. The greatest victory was never making him regret. The greatest victory was this, the open road and the cold air, and the work waiting ahead, and the wolf awake and easy in her chest, and the simple, undeniable fact of her own forward motion. She was not someone's Luna. She was Evelina Ashford, and she had somewhere to be.